the same vote that got him into office twice before. And we as Americans have done nothing. Well, here's another WND exclusive that talks about the White House versus Americans on voter ID, because voter ID would pretty much cure this problem. Activist James O'Keefe looks and sounds nothing like Attorney General Eric Holder, yet when O'Keefe presented himself at a polling place in Washington, D.C. and said he was Holder, there were no questions asked. Despite never being asked, O'Keefe, a white man, then in his late 20s, told the poll worker he had forgotten his identification. "You don't need it, it's all right," the poll worker responds. "As long as you're here and you're on our list and that you're who you say you are, you're okay." The election worker told O'Keefe, who leads the group Project Veritas, which repeatedly has exposed questionable and illegal practices by election workers, but in the upcoming 2014 midterm elections, O'Keefe, or anybody else for that matter, would still not need any form of ID to vote as Holder in the national capital or in more than a dozen other states. This is due in part to the effort of the Justice Department under Holder, who continues to insist that voter ID laws are both unneeded and discriminatory. Look, O'Keefe told WND that millions and millions of people recognize his face from being dressed up as a pimp. That's what he's known for. Yet I was offered the ballot of then United States Attorney General Eric Holder. O'Keefe said, Holder says that in-person voter fraud doesn't exist, as did former DNC Chair Donna Brazile in a heated Twitter exchange last week when she called allegations over voter fraud a big lie. Well, O'Keefe continued. He said progressives keep burying their heads in the sand on the voter ID issue to the point of absolute absurdity, he said. Even if I went to a polling place and claimed to be Donna Brazile and was handed her ballot, they'd still refuse to acknowledge that there's any problem with the system. Now, while O'Keefe did not need an ID to vote as Obama's Attorney General, he did need identification to visit the Justice Department later to chat about the issue. Other activities that require ID, including driving, boarding an airplane, buying medicine, banking, visiting the doctor, applying for a job, going to school, signing up for utilities, buying a home, buy a car, purchase insurance, borrow a library book, you need ID. To rent a house, traveling abroad, if you want to pawn something, writing a check, donating blood, obtaining any type of welfare. You're supposed to have it, even though we know in a lot of places that doesn't happen. What about going to court, applying for a professional license, using a credit card, purchasing or renting a car, walking into any government building, or buying alcohol, tobacco, or firearms? You have to have ID. Yet you can go into any voter place, claim to be anybody, and vote with no ID at all. Does this make any sense at all? And yet the American people do absolutely nothing about this. Look, friends, we need to remember, we are not accountable to the government. The government is accountable to us. We, the people. We need to get back with that attitude. We don't answer to them. They answer to us. You know, Fox News Politics recently did a story on this, where they say more states begin providing illegal immigrants and their children with driver's licenses and ID cards. Our officials are concerned. Some are also registering to vote, some by mistake, others on purpose. Now, this problem came to light recently in North Carolina, which compares its voter rolls against a federal immigration database. The cross-check of 10,000 voters found 1,425 likely non-citizen voters, including 190 illegal immigrants or so-called dreamers. Almost 10% registered to vote when getting their driver's license. But elected officials say the problem is nationwide. Now, in terms of a check and balance that would prevent an individual who's a non-citizen from registering to vote, that doesn't exist. There's absolutely nothing stopping them. This, according to Neil Kelly, Orange County Registrar of Voters and Chairman of the California Association of Election Officials. The problem, officials say, dates back to the 1993 Federal Motor Voter Act, which requires states to offer residents the ability to register to vote when they obtain a driver's license or ID card. In some states, The driver's license and voter registration application are on the same form, and the applicant simply signs. In small print, the form says applicants acknowledge that they're a U.S. citizen. In other states, voter registration is a separate form, and applicants have to check a box. Well, in either case, once signed, the forms are automatically sent to the county or state registrar of votes, and the name is added to the voter polls. State DMVs are not required to authenticate citizenship. They're asked to check a box that they're a U.S. citizen. But that's not good enough, says Krish Kabash, Kansas Secretary of State, who says we have many aliens on our voter rolls who check that box, either because they're trying to break the law or because they don't know exactly what they're doing. There are two ways to eliminate or slow the problem. While only U.S. citizens can vote, only 4 states require proof before registering: Kansas, Arizona, Georgia, and Alabama. But the ACLU and others sued, stopping Virginia, Iowa, and Florida from purging voter rolls of non-citizens. Does that make any sense at all? They went to say that we want the public to understand that people are not being proactive in dealing with this massive problem, says Jay Delaney, director of the North Carolina Voter Integrity Project. Many states that have DACA licenses, any state that offers any sort of driver's license to people who are not citizens, has this problem. The ACLU claims a federal immigration database isn't perfect and could disenfranchise voters. Well, under the National Voter Registration Act, states are required to remove from their registration lists of ineligible voters. But U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder refuses to enforce that statute. Not a single such lawsuit has been filed since the beginning of the Obama administration, according to John Fund. This is a huge problem, Kabash said. Once the aliens get on the voter rolls, solutions don't solve the problems. If you want to work with the federal government, you're going to make you jump through a whole bunch of hoops. Use of the SAVE database, while not perfect, and it isn't cheap, each name cross-check cost a state or county about 50 cents. In Maryland, a voter integrity group obtained a list of residents who were removed from jury duty because they were non-citizens. Among them, 509 were also registered to vote. The group, Virginia Voters Alliance, claim up to 7% of Maryland's registered voters are non-citizens. Kaylee said that yes, this can occur, whether they're a felon or a parole or a non-U.S. citizen or somebody else who may be ineligible to vote, they can end up on the voter rolls. Well, here in Oregon, on November 4th, it's on our ballot to give illegals what they're calling a driver card. Now, we had this problem in the past when we were giving driver's licenses to anyone. And it turned out that airports and federal and state institutions across the country refused to accept Oregon ID because Oregon was giving their ID to anyone. So we had an initiative and made that practice illegal. So you have to prove you're a citizen in Oregon in order to get a driver's license. Well, our governor, who is up for re-election and at the moment is in a huge quagmire of ethics problems, on his own signed a bill saying that we would give illegals driver cards. Apparently, he has a very short memory of what happened last time. Governor Kitzhaber claims that this driver card that he wants to issue to the illegals would only allow them to drive and nothing else. Well, Lars Larson, the local national talk show host here in the Portland area, called the FAA and asked if this driver card could be used as identification to board an airplane. They said yes. It's state issued, has their picture on it. Yes, it can be used as ID to board an airplane. So Governor Kitzhaber not only took this action on his own against the will of the people, and it's not the first time he's done this, but he also lied to us about it. Now, the people have to rise up a second time and do what we did the first time. Make this practice illegal. You have to prove you're a citizen by showing your birth certificate in order to get a driver's license. The governor cannot act on his own against what we have already voted into law. So this is a huge problem. What about other forms of fraud? Well, according to Breitbart, Video Machine switches votes from Republican to Democrat in Illinois. There's a video that's emerged from Illinois of what they're calling a calibration error that causes voting machines to switch votes from Republican to Democrat. The video, which is posted on YouTube, reportedly shows video machines in the public library in Moline, Illinois, registering voters as Democrat when the Republican is clearly the intended choice. Several voters in Rock Island County have already claimed publicly that similar problems with local voting machines and early voting. One local voter, Christina Kirk, told local ABC affiliate KWQC6 last week, "When I went to cast my vote and I touched the screen for my Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate was the one that would pop up with my X, even though I pressed the Republican candidate." The YouTube footage is the first visual report of the alleged problem with these voting machines. The error appears to occur when the voter's finger is slightly off-center in the Republican box, which appears below the Democratic box. It's apparently still possible to vote for the Republican candidate, but it's possible for a vigilant voter to correct the mistake and vote again. But a voter in a hurry might easily register a mistake vote for a Democrat by mistake and fail to notice. The problem seems to occur throughout the ticket races. No test involving a voter trying to choose for Democrat candidate and selecting the Republican instead is ever shown. Former Rep. Bobby Schilling, who's running for his former seat in a district that was redrawn by Democrats after 2010, has held a press conference to tell the reporters that he's heard many similar complaints throughout the county. The complaints mirror those of voters in Cook County. On the other side of the state, where GOP representative candidate Jim Moynihan tried to vote for himself, and the machine cast his vote for his opponent. The Cook County Clerk's office told nonprofit Monitor Illinois Watchdog that the voting machine experienced a quote-unquote calibration error that improperly assigned Moynihan's vote. Well, a similar calibration error seems to be an issue in Rock Island County. Schilling claimed last week that they've received 17 calls of people saying the exact same thing. And apparently this is a problem nationwide. Is it a mistake? Yeah, maybe. Maybe not. What do you think? Look, let me say this. As Christians, and I think the majority of people who listen to this program have some sort of Christian affiliation. Town Hall Magazine has a message that I'm going to share with you. That if Christians don't vote, more Christians are going to be persecuted. Now, a lot of people will hear that and say, "Oh, come on." Well, listen to the story before you say that. Mike Huckabee said on his show recently, only about 40 million of the 80 million evangelical Christians in America are even registered to vote. Only about half of those actually vote in a presidential election, and only half of them, about 10 million, vote in midterms, like the important election coming up this November 4th. His numbers seem pretty accurate according to the various sources, yet nearly 80% of Americans say they're Christians. It's often observed, if you don't vote, you can't complain. If Christians don't vote in this election and help turn this country back to our founders' faith-based values, we can't whine when it comes to the government stealing more of our religious freedoms like this. An administration and Department of Justice that sues a group of Catholic nuns called the Little Sisters of the Poor because they refuse to provide birth control drugs to their employees. The Little Sisters were founded in 1839. They provide a loving, caring place for over 13,000 needy elderly in 31 countries, with some 30 homes in the U.S. alone. They subsist entirely on donations. Wouldn't that money be better spent on the poor than on a government lawsuit forcing them to violate their religious beliefs? How about ordained minister like Donald and Evelyn Knapp, owners of Hitching Post Wedding Chapel in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, sued by the government and now at risk of up to 180 days in jail or thousands in fines for each day they refuse to perform same-sex ceremonies? And I'm not kidding about that. The government threatening to court-martial soldiers who talk about their faith and military chaplains who pray, quote-unquote, in the name of Jesus. Court-martial could mean that soldiers who share the gospel or even discuss their faith with their friends could face criminal punishment such as imprisonment or dishonorably discharged. We have the opportunity to vote those kind of people out of office. That's how important this vote is. Fresh from their